Douglas Murray, hello.
Hello.
Thank you for taking the time, meeting me here, Tamesis Docks in London. Lovely view of the Palace of Westminster. We will be delving into the heavy subjects of the day. Thank you for taking the time.
It's a great pleasure.
How's it going?
Well, you know, as good as it can in these strange times.
Yes, indeed. Strange times, and a new paperback for you, The Madness of Crowds, updated, new material. Tell us about it. What's new in it?
I've written a new chapter because there's so much that's happened in the year since I wrote this. I wrote The Madness of Crowds thinking it was sort of in part going to be able to be a warning, you know, that I could say, look, be careful of the route we're going down. We're going down this route where we're digging down on all racial differences, all sexual differences, all gender differences. And maybe we should try a different route, which is to try to get past these things. I'm not sure my warning was heeded, which is sobering for any writer, but also, of course, has provided me with an enormous amount of new material, because the things I was saying have just got worse in the year since. And I should add a caveat to that, which I think when we last spoke virtually, I was of the opinion that, well, the COVID crisis might dampen some of this down. We were certainly at the beginning of the crisis, it looked that we were facing a problem that might be a generational disaster. That's not to say it might not still be, but in different ways the way in which we thought at the beginning, when people were talking about losing large percentages of their population and so on. At that stage I thought, well, maybe people won't have much time for sort of imaginary grievances if we've all got a real grievance, or all got grievances of our own. And so I thought maybe this stuff will go away a bit. Maybe we'll have people relying a bit less, leaning a little less heavily on these differences between us. Maybe we will actually find an ability to come together as societies, as people. And then exactly the opposite turned out to happen, which, as I say, is sort of the focus of what I've written that's new.
So we spoke.
So I'm going to try to find that interview that Douglas did. He said, during COVID. And I didn't realize that Douglas had that opinion, that he basically was saying that he thought that perhaps COVID would unite people. And instead of, trivializing over frivolous things, it might bring everyone together because of the fact that, COVID was sweeping the globe and people were dying, people were getting sick, and maybe they would basically channel their feelings and their intentions and everything towards solving this problem, or just making sure that everything is is well and good and everything else is just trivial. I don't think that's ever going to happen, folks, because people go back to what they were thinking and doing as we go through these phases. Look at what happened. World War I, World War II, all types of famine and plagues and other things that have occurred throughout time and history. And people have always been, fractionated into their own tribes, into their own cultures, obviously into their own countries and whatever. And still afterwards, they just go right back to what that is. So as far as all of this animosity, as far as the turmoil, as far as all of the anger, the angst, the division, the tribalism, all of this, that's going to continue to stay, and it is not going to get better. Remember, we all thought that with the election of Barack Obama, the first half black, half white president in United States history, that race relations were basically, that was it. It was done. We elected a black president. And you know what? Okay. You know what? Racism, done, gone. It's solved forever. It's just gotten worse, folks. Just gotten worse. Anyways, let's continue some more with this interview with Douglas Murray. Before we do that, you're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, and that's what we have on tap for you today, folks. Another interview with Douglas Murray. I'll give you my political prescription from my political perspective on what happens when you've got all these things that are colliding in the world. Social media, entertainment, religion, politics, science, biology. Douglas Murray. Let's get to more of the interview right now.
It first came out for about an hour. I would encourage anyone to watch that if they want to get sort of a feel for the overall scope of the book. the new material, new events, the one that obviously stands out to me would be the spread of the Black Lives Matter movement. Because, you know, sadly, it's a tale as old as time. A black man is shot by the police in America. There's outcry, there's a protest, but something different happened this time. And the movement got take up and spread, particularly in the UK, but around the world in a way that I don't think it did before. Why do you think that is?
Lots of things. One is the nature of modern technology, that a video of somebody being killed is inevitably much harder than, much more unpleasant, much more visceral than reading in your morning paper, as we did until this generation, reading in your morning paper that something terrible had happened. So that's the first thing, is the nature of the dissemination of the material makes these things a lot more raw. I think the second thing is a specific issue to do with the times we've been in. My own view was that at a certain point in the lockdown, people were looking for a reason to break. This isn't to ignore any of the legitimacy of parts of the Black Lives Matter movement protests, but rather just say that you could feel it. We had been constrained in our houses for months. If we had spoken last year and I said to you in 2020, everybody who's not in a committed relationship will be forced by a Tory government into celibacy for months on end, you might have said to me, "Are you sure that's likely to happen?" and all of the young people will take that? You're absolutely sure? Yeah, sure. No, we wouldn't have seen that coming.
Yeah,
so there was certainly a moment in this where people were looking for a cause that trumped COVID to justify breaking lockdown, and I think that is a part of the factor. And then you get into the real complexity of what Black Lives Matter and the movement is and what actually happened in Minnesota. And I think this is hugely contestable territory at this point.
So true, so true.
Here's the biggest problem I think that exists with the BLM protests. They are essentially running against an invisible opposition. That is, there is a genius in the movement, and I followed the movement pretty closely since it originally formed earlier this decade. The justification of the movement is, yes, there are cases in America where black people have been killed in highly questionable circumstances by the police. Now I say questionable because some of the circumstances in which this movement has found its raison d'etre have actually proved not to be what they were presented as. I'm thinking of the shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, 6 years ago now, where the claim was that the man who was shot had his hands in the air. Then at the subsequent trial, it turned out that he had lunged for the policeman, the arresting police officer's gun. That makes the circumstances different. But by that time, the movement had already got another martyr. Now, as I say, there is a legitimate question about policing in America, and then there is what has happened in recent weeks and months. And in my view, Black Lives Matter has been running against an effectively absent opposition. I don't think there is anybody in British public life or American public life who says black lives don't matter, or who doesn't think that something like what happened in Minnesota isn't appalling. So when a movement says and claims its moral legitimacy from something that seems to be non-oppositional, I start to get worried.
I just want to stop here basically and say that on this aspect, I disagree with Douglas Murray. I know he says he's been to the United States, and he's basically saying that Black Lives Matter was running, unopposed in terms of being, having any opposition, anybody, standing up to it. Now, in the beginning, there were, but there was a huge, massive groundswell. You had protests going on, and that visceral component from people immediately certainly was drowning out voices from the conservative side. But you had people like Charlie Kirk, you had people like, Ben Shapiro, you had people like Candace Owens, Turning Point USA, Campus Reform, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, even, President Trump himself, and so many other conservative voices that were out there that were opposing this. And it was a huge, conservative talk radio was against this. And flyover country, if you want to talk about it in terms of the United States of America, was completely opposed to this. But yes, were you seeing it on the Clinton Negro Network, CNN? Were you seeing it on MSLSD, the Delusional Network? Were you seeing it on, Never Been Conservative NBC or Anything But Conservative ABC? Or the, commune broadcasting system, CBS, or any of the alphabet Google networks out there? No, they were pushing it hard. But then slowly and slowly and slowly, it got to a point where people were wanting all that money, the millions of dollars, the exposés that were done, the homes that were bought by some of the leaders, and some of the leaders broke off and splinter groups. And now you're finding out that they can't find out what happened to millions upon millions of dollars that were sent into BLM. And effectively, it has been, I think, pretty much squashed. It's still there, but not at all like the power that it had initially when that initial inertia and that initial tsunami came. Anyways, let's continue more with the interview.
Where is this opposition that is saying Black lives don't matter? And then you get to the oddity of the time with things like the stadium events. Now, if it weren't for COVID and completely empty terraces, I don't think we'd have seen some of the phenomenon we've seen in recent weeks. The other day there was a cricket match, England was playing, and the BBC announcer said, and now, of course, both teams will be taking the knee. As if this was a long-standing tradition that's always happened at the beginning, same at the beginning of all these football games. I don't think this would have happened if the terraces had been full. It's happening in empty stadiums because it's very hard for people to judge when there is literally nobody in front of them what a particular mood is. And here's a guess, if I can say so, at what the mood is in the city we're sitting in now. I would have thought that most people in Britain, and the polls show this, are completely opposed to the actions of the Minnesota cop who has, as I say, zero defenders. He's in prison, he's awaiting trial for murder. And hopefully he'll get a fair trial, but it doesn't look good for him, we can say, from the footage that anyone can see. But I would have thought that public opinion in this country does not believe that on the basis of that one cop's behavior,
yes,
there should be a sustained war on, for instance, all of British history, or claims made about all British people,
or U.S. history,
let alone,
or U.S. people.
Is the most divisive and unhelpful one of all, mass racial generalizations based on skin pigmentation that try to pretend that, for instance, all white people are responsible for something like the actions of that Minnesotan cop.
Which happens all the time
And
here
that's
in
what
the
starts to
United
make me
States.
worried. Because I think what we're seeing there is not a remotely fair estimation.
Not even
It's not
close.
a call for justice, it's a call for division at that point.
Yes.
It's a stoking of division. And about that, I think we should all, whatever anyone's political preferences or background, we should be united in saying, no, there you don't get to go.
Absolutely true.
It's interesting. I spoke to Afua Hirsch a couple months ago, and you're both in agreement about that COVID had a role to play in the spread of Black Lives Matter movement. I thought that common ground could be useful in our current times, but obviously you differ on much else.
I think Afua and I would diverge after that moment.
At that point, yeah.
She makes an unnamed appearance in the new chapter in the Madison
really?
Crowd. Yes, because I mentioned the fact that when the hardback of Madison Crowds came out, I was given the gift of Sam Smith coming out as something new that week. I can't remember which sexuality he announced himself to be that week, but it was non-binary that time. And I said that I was waiting for explanation of what this is. That as a gay man, I don't like this attempt to keep disappearing gay people and calling people genderqueer, non-binary, and a whole load of other stuff that, as I explain in one of the chapters in this book, makes no sense. Anyhow, Sam Smith gifted me his latest attempt to look at me by coming out as plural. And I mentioned
they, them, that's what you're referring to by plural. Yeah.
And I mentioned that I was in a radio discussion with somebody who berating me for not giving Sam Smith the correct pronouns, and the fact that this person berating me for this couldn't themselves not say him, he, and that person was, of course, Afua Hirsch. So it's harder to maul the language than some of these social justice activists pretend. It's not actually that straightforward to say, I am a fan of their singing. They was good on the stage tonight.
Well, there you have it, folks. They, them, this, thou, he, she, it, right? As Douglas Murray put it, it just gets so freaking confusing after a while in terms of what you have to say. And these people, they want you to confirm them. They want that affirmation. And I always ask the question, if you need somebody else's affirmation for you to be who you say you truly are deep in your inner core, if you can't affirm that yourself and be satisfied with that affirmation, then there's something wrong if you need somebody else's validation to affirm your affirmation of your confirmation of what you think you are. I hope that made sense. Because this whole thing is whatever. Anyways, they, them is out. We appreciate you watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host, Dr. Nasir. And if you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel if we've earned it. Like, share, and follow us. You know what to do. Check out our other video links above and below. I'll leave you with my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.